Content Championship? Question mark?
Yes.
It's a big boy. It's another dirty week. I feel like it's not a difficult answer, but it's not one we're gonna like.
This is true.
And this is the problem. We're getting less like genuinely mind-meltingly difficult ones, and more it's an easy one, but I don't like that it's easy. We have of course got Iron Man 1, starring Robert Downey Jr., came out in 2008 for Horry's 56th birthday, versus Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings, the first book Horizontal read as a first edition.
I read it at 1 year old.
Yeah.
I don't actually know when the first edition came out.
The Hobbit came out like 39, didn't it?
Yes. Anyway.
It's old. So, as always, 6 categories.
Mm-hmm.
Personal relevance, how well it has aged, rewatchability, story, acting, and cinematography.
Yes.
Would you like to get started? Maybe
I think it's almost safe to say. I'm trying to rack my memory, but from memory, I would actually say that I think Lord of the Rings was the first franchise of films that I ever watched, like very young. Like I can remember watching Lord of the Rings sooner than before I watched Star Wars, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
So like Lord of the Rings I have like loved for a long time, from a very young age.
It was your nerd birth.
It was my nerd canon event. It got me into the world of nerddom. And I remember because it's like they were long films. And there was like I think it was my uncle or something got me to watch them. Or we put them on when I was at my uncle's.
And you only watched the extended editions.
Well, yeah, it's like, this is like a long film, and this is just the first one. There's 3 of them, and it's like, and then since I've been alive, like they brought out the extended editions that have even more footage. But Lord of the Rings, it's just like it's such a staple franchise, and really just like, I mean, we'll get into like how well it's aged, but timeless. But then Iron Man 1 was like I remember the birth of the MCU. Without that film, there would be no MCU. Like we know this as fact that and that film was not expected to be this huge success and lead to what it has. Like it was just we want to make this film, threw it out there. As a kid, I'm like, holy shit, guy in a robotic suit. This is cool as fuck. And then, like, I mean,
you could said kid when he was 19 in 2008.
Bro, I was like 14. You could also, it's hard to say, but either of these could technically be the reason this podcast. I mean, more so Iron Man, I would say, because the MCU was like a solid reason this podcast happened.
If not for the MCU, this probably wouldn't be going. Yeah. Because that's when we first started having these conversations, because it was
all the MCU stuff happening.
Everything going on in the MCU, friends always asking what was going on.
Yeah.
And it was just like what the MCU is the reason this podcast exists, but it's not the reason we fell in love with the genres.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. Like Iron Man is the reason I am here doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings is the reason I became a nerd.
Yeah. If not for me, the Raimi films and the X-Men films in the noughties, I wouldn't have given a fuck about the MCU early enough to know enough to have even considered this. There's a difference between the reason it's able to exist and the reason we gave a fuck.
I would say Lord of the Rings is the only reason I give a fuck about D&D. And I love D&D. But like that entrance into fantasy, I think that's why, to me, Lord of the Rings is my takes it on personal relevance.
Interesting. Claims to love D&D but hasn't played Baldur's Gate with me. Interesting.
I haven't had time to buy it. I have literally. I thought about this the other day, and I was like, even if I bought it right now, I don't have time to play, and that would frustrate me more. Owning a game and not being able to play it.
Do you know what the crazy thing is? Having now played a fair bit of it, my
You want to start
brain
again?
is trying to put a character together for if we do a co-op playthrough. I'm like,
Oh,
I want to do stuff slightly differently. So I'm like, oh, what could I do? I want to have a bit more fun with it. Anyway,
we'll do it.
back on topic. Yeah.
But yeah, for you, what's it was for you?
Obviously, for me, I'm more superhero focused, which is why we have such a good balance here.
Yes.
Iron Man was the start of the MCU. It changed comic book media in a way I don't think anyone fully understands yet. And it was the beginning and inception of the largest film franchise in the history. I double checked it, don't worry.
Yeah, that's fine.
And also, although we know RDJ is a superstar now, he was the recently out of prison drug addict who was the big risk. That was the talking point when this film was coming out. It's like, oh, Marvel and Disney taking a huge risk with Robert Downey Jr. being the face of their new film.
Yeah.
Like, that was a huge talking point. And now he's just Robert Downey Jr., the man who's probably about to win an Oscar for his role in Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Whereas with Lord of the Rings, it's the first film in what is largely regarded one of the greatest trilogies of all time. And it created an entire new generation of fantasy fans. I mean, you literally just said it.
Yeah.
If not for Lord of the Rings, you probably wouldn't give a fuck about D&D. And when D&D is like the second biggest part of the fantasy genre and fandom,
Yeah.
like, it shows how big a reach Lord of the Rings had.
It really did.
And I think we can see that with like moving into how well they've aged. For Lord of the Rings, I literally put perfectly. Like an expensive fine wine, everyone wishes they could experience it for the first time again. And it is that.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings is definitely one of them trilogies. If someone said, take this pill and you will get to experience the extended editions for the first time, everyone is scoffing that motherfucker down.
Yeah. I mean, like you say, it's aged perfectly. And I think also in like how well it's aged, like it's aged so well across all generations. Like my parents know and think highly of Lord of the Rings. Like, yeah, it's this amazing trilogy of films. My like me, my siblings and cousins this age, like we all love Lord of the Rings. Like our age range probably were the first that like grew up from a young age, got tattoos and really fell in love with it. And across, I mean, there's a whole generation that are now in love with Aragorn.
Yeah.
And create thirst trap TikToks of him.
Yeah.
So I mean, in that sense, that didn't exist for a while ago, like back when it came out, and it does now. So it's aged very well for a lot of people.
100%.
I also think Iron Man's aged well.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's one of the most beloved comic book movies ever. And recently, people are complaining they missed that exact time of comic book movies.
Yeah. It's
and it was just after the mid 2000s where stuff was a little bit weird and the story was a bit too cut and paste. And they were like, well, we'll stick it close enough to that it feels right, but we'll change it enough to give it its own life. But I do think for the most part it lives and dies on RDJ's performance.
Yes, and I think if it'd been made without, like, I don't think it would have happened without him. And because of that, it's like there's a lot of weight on like it had to happen exactly how it did. And yes, it's aged well, and everyone like looks back on it and wishes the MCU was kind of back to that era of the MCU and different things. But it's not Lord of the Rings. It's
Rewatchability.
That's tough. Because one, you
So
can quite easily sit down and watch.
Iron Man, I said, it has very high rewatchability since it's at the start of the MCU, so no other context is needed.
Yeah.
You can watch Iron Man 1, you don't have to watch another film afterwards,
Yeah.
and you can just go, that was a fun 2 hours.
Yeah. I would say like similar. I'm on one, start of it. You don't need to know any other context. You can just enjoy Iron Man. It's a great film.
Just don't watch the cutscene at the end and you'll be fine. You won't be sat there going, oh, what happens next?
It's also like it's not like some big undertaking. Whereas Lord of the Rings, it's like if someone said, "Do you want to watch Lord of the Rings?" I'd be like, "Oh, we got time to watch Lord of the Rings."
Yeah.
Like it's an like I'm always down to watch it, but like you got to make time to watch Lord of the Rings.
Well, here's the thing. I refuse to watch anything other than the extended editions.
Yeah.
And that makes it a 3.5 hour film.
Which,
And after you watch that, you're going to be desperate to watch the second one.
yeah.
And then the third one.
Yeah.
So you sat there and you're like, oh, well, it's only a 3 hour film. And then I go, no, we're watching the extended cut. That's another half an hour. And then before you know it, that's 3.5 hours out of a day where you're probably only awake for 16 anyway.
Yeah.
You're probably gonna lose half an hour pausing it to go for a piss or getting a snack. Then you're at 4 hours, and then someone is gonna go, "Do you want to put the next one on?" And you go, "Yeah." And then the extended cut of that one's like 3.5,
Yeah,
4
no,
hours
it's
as
gonna be
well.
tough.
And then before you know it, it's 6 a.m. the next day, and you're like, "That was so worth it." But my God, I just wanted to watch one film.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's like, or like it becomes, oh, well, we'll have to watch that tomorrow. So now let's shift around tomorrow so we can watch the second.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to plan a Lord of the Rings viewing and just go, right, we're getting up at 10 o'clock Saturday morning. We will sort breakfast. We'll watch the first one. We'll sort lunch. We'll eat our lunch while watching the second one. Then we'll cook dinner and have dinner while we're watching the third one. And then we'll go to bed. And it's got to be timed out to perfection.
Do you know what would be perfect for a Lord of the Rings marathon?
Gone.
If elven bread was real. Just eat elven bread before it starts. You're sustained for the whole running. But I do think we're both very much leaning here to I feel Iron Man.
It's only just more rewatchable because of the lack
Slightly
of...
more convenient.
Yes, exactly. And when it comes to me rewatching stuff, because I have such good memory for stuff I've watched, I always choose convenience.
Yeah.
Which is why I end up watching 20-minute sitcoms over and over again, because every 20-minute interval, I get the opportunity to put it down and go, enough's enough.
Yeah. I think that's fair.
Now I know one of the first things I'm going to have to do when I move into my new house is
You
the first Lord of the Rings
Don't
viewing.
worry, I'm now sat here going, when can I watch Lord of the Rings?
When do I have 12 hours that I don't need to do anything?
If I wasn't having to watch Invincibles this week, I'd probably do it this week. But
unlucky buddy, you made the rules, I just enforced them. Now on to the ones where I think Iron Man's in a lot more trouble.
Yeah.
Story.
I mean, Iron Man's an origin story. It's a good one. Does a great job of introducing you to Iron Man. I think it's a solid, good all-round superhero origin story, but that is simply what it is. Yeah. Lord of the Rings is the first in a incredible trilogy that, let's be honest, that story in the first film captivates you for wanting, like we said, you've got to sit down and watch the rest of them. Like, the story is so good. There's a reason it's such a well-regarded series of books, and it was brought to life so well on film.
I'm very much with you. You basically use the same words as me for Iron Man. Simple, but it hits all the major notes at a solid pace. It is the gold standard for a superhero origin film. Yeah. Unfortunately, with the amount of superhero films we've had, everyone's bored of origin films now, which I think hurts the story slightly retroactively, but not enough for it to matter because it is still the gold standard.
Yeah.
Whereas Lord of the Rings, it's a masterpiece. It's literally one of the greatest stories ever told.
Mm-hmm.
Like in when the written word is as old as it is, and we've got books now that are so popular from 200-ish years ago, this is one of the greatest stories ever told. To the point where even people who will sit there unironically and say that superhero stuff and Star Wars is for nerds and losers will not diss Lord of the Rings. They're like, no, it's really well written. Yeah, it's not my kind. Yeah, it's not my cup of tea, but it is really well written. No
Yeah.
one faults that. And I don't think the film does either. It takes that story and tells it faithfully.
Yeah. Agreed.
Acting.
I mean,
This is where Iron Man gets the closest in these.
yes, because RDJ is Iron Man. Like,
100%.
they saw him, like, when they were making that film, they knew immediately, as soon as he was on set, like, he was Iron Man. He was Tony Stark. That film lived and died by that.
Mm-hmm.
They had some great actors that...
They had Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane.
Yeah, they had a stacked cast for a film, for a franchise that was not established. This was just a film they wanted to make. They hoped it made a profit. They weren't too worried about anything past that. They just wanted to make a good film and have fun. And they got a stacked cast. They did. Lord of the Rings also has quite the stacked cast.
Yeah, so this is exactly what I said. Although RDJ as Iron Man Tony Stark is seen as one of the greatest castings of all time, and Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane was a phenomenal decision. And like for that film, Samuel L. Jackson got the role of Nick Fury. Yes, he wasn't in a lot of the film, but this is why we start to get some of these brilliant, long-lasting casting decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But the Lord of the Rings cast is a cast full of superstars. Some of them were superstars before Lord of the Rings, and some of them became superstars because of Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
Orlando Bloom, who
Yep.
dominated the cinema from Lord of the Rings through to like 2012, was all because Lord of the Rings. That was like one of his first big acting roles. Elijah Wood was pretty famous, but was young.
Yeah.
But then you've got people like Ian McKellen, one of the all-time greats.
Who, like we said, RDJ is Iron Man. Ian McKellen is Gandalf.
Yeah.
Like,
one that I even forgot because of just like the quality of makeup and how old the films are, and the faces don't always line up how I remember them now. Kate Blanchett.
Yeah.
It's just stacked.
Oh yeah, like
top to bottom.
Don't forget we had Andy Serkis was Gollum.
Because Andy Serkis does not miss.
Sean Bean, not as maybe as highly regarded as Ian McKellen, but at the time, Sean Bean was a very well regarded actor.
Christopher motherfucking Lee.
Yeah. Like
it's just top to bottom a phenomenal cast.
Yeah,
and the acting lives up to everyone's abilities.
Yeah. It's just unfortunate. Like Iron Man was stacked, but like you're going against.
But as good as Iron Man was, they also didn't need to do as much.
No.
Yeah, like there was less high quality acting required.
Yeah, the story and the acting for Iron Man is what you would expect from a Marvel film. Lord of the Rings was, you are acting like what the book, like those books are very well written, which means you have to do some goddamn good acting.
And also, it was at the beginning of this kind of new wave of using CGI and visual effects so much, which meant they hadn't had a lot of experience working in this kind of situation before. So they had to learn how to do it on the spot. Whereas now, actors have been acting in this way for 20 years since Lord of the Rings. So actors know how to do it now. They were the first. They were breaking ground.
Well, that's also the thing. It's like Lord of the Rings was, and I guess this is now kind of feeding into cinematography a bit.
Yeah.
But Lord of the Rings was at like that peak of what we love, where still very heavy practical, with then CGI added in there, like
Put it this way:
enhanced
you can still
backdrops.
go visit the Shire. Like
Yes, the Shire.
they built proper fucking sets, and then they enhanced it with
Well,
computers.
that's the funny thing. The first time around, it was a temporary thing, and they're like, it's fine. Then they're like, shit, this film franchise is like really blowing up. We need a bit more of a permanent set. To the point where that is a running business now to go visit the Shire. You can stay there. You can eat in the big town hall building. Like, it's a whole experience.
They'd think you were a wizard giant if you turn up.
Yeah, I would literally be like Gandalf walking into those homes,
Yeah,
hitting my head on stuff.
you'd have to.
But that's the thing. Like, the cinematography of Lord of the Rings, it was like I've watched just as much of the behind the scenes stuff as I have the films, and it's like they put in the work to make those films, like climbing up mountains, taking helicopter. I can't remember which.
I mean, Viggo Mortensen broke his toe.
I can't remember which actor it was, but he had a fear of helicopters, so he refused to fly to the top of the mountain for a scene. It could have been Sean Bean.
Sean Bean.
But like he then hiked up a mountain in his like whole kit, and like that was the thing. Everything was practical.
Yeah, it was Sean Bean.
But like
he spent
CGI
2 hours
thrown in there.
scaling a
That was
mountain
it.
each day so that he could film the scenes because he refused to get in the helicopters.
Which is why, like,
fucking hilarious.
I mean,
could you imagine that in Hollywood today?
Oh, it wouldn't happen. But that's the thing. Like, a lot of what happened on Lord of the Rings wouldn't happen today because they'd just do it on blue screen or green screen. Like, you can't like the way that film was made, like, brought so much like industry into New Zealand. That was great for their economy. It showed so much love. Well, yeah, and showed so much love. Like the land, like going to those landscape spots and doing like there's so much work was put into that film, and it's shot amazingly.
I'm sure basically any day of the year you can go to one of these parts of New Zealand and you will see people in full cosplay reenacting their favorite Lord of the Rings scenes.
Probably.
I promise you.
You can probably go and be like, this is 90% exactly how you see it on the film. 100%. With just like a bit of extra mountain. Most of the time, it's just them adding in Mount Doom.
Yeah. Peter Jackson's a genius.
Yeah, he is.
It's that simple. And my man really made them films, made his studio, and dipped. Like, he really was just like, yeah, I'm just going to go be a billionaire. Cheers.
Iron Man, I mean, it was on a small budget, and they made that happen. And I mean, it's one of the only, I think it's the only film where RDJ was in a full suit.
I don't think it was a full suit a lot of the time. I think there was a couple of shots that were the full suit, but then a lot of the time it was like half of the suit, and they used the shots with the full suit to CG in the rest of it. But yeah, that was as close as he ever got to consistently being in the full suit.
After that, it was shoulder pads, and that was about it.
Yeah, it was shoulder pads, and then it got down eventually to just being the dots on the fucking face.
So, I mean, like, it was very well made and well shot, and it set the standard for what the MCU became, which was like good, solid superhero films, but it's just not on the same level of Lord of the Rings.
Like I said, for cinematography, it's good. Nothing overly special. The CGI was stellar for the time and still holds up, especially on the budget they were on.
Yeah.
But it was not shot to be a visual masterpiece and was never expected to launch the MCU as it ended up being. Yeah, they wanted it to be a franchise of films. They weren't thinking 50 projects in 15 years, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in revenue. Like, they weren't expecting that.
No. Whereas Lord of the Rings was like, we have to turn this masterpiece of a book, and all the people that have read it and what they've imagined, we've got to somehow bring that to life. And I think they succeeded.
Exactly that.
So, although it feels dirty to do Iron Man like this,
because of our love for Iron Man
and the respect we hold to that film, but unfortunately, it was put against Lord of the Rings, and
blame Horry.
I nearly made a pun then, and I stopped myself because it would have been bad.
Okay, well, I'm glad you did.
But Lord of the
But
Rings goes ahead.